Can I, first of all, just say a little bit about who I am? I'm Andrew Watton. You may ask, why am I here chairing tonight's hustings? It's a question I ask myself as well. There's three reasons. The Mayor, Kevin Cranston, would have chaired the meeting. He's away, and it was planned before the date was announced. The second is I don't actually live in the constituency, so therefore I have no vote. And third, as an estate agent, I'm probably less popular than politicians. So, thank you very much.
You said it.
Thank you very much.
Andrew, you're the most popular estate agent in Stroud, though.
You're very kind. I think Bruce Forsyth would say, and you're my favourite as well. Shortly, I will ask each of our hopeful MPs to do a 2-minute introduction as to who they are and what they stand for. And each will have a moment to do that. We've taken cards to say the order, so there's no preference as such. They come out at 1 to 5. We will then have questions. We have, I can say, a goodly number of questions. Probably, I haven't counted up, I would think we're probably between 50 and 60. So what I shall do during the introductions is I will quickly run through those and see if I can garner some form of standard question which is there. And then the questions will be raised. Each will have 2 minutes. Each of the prospective candidates are here tonight, and they have 2 minutes. If there is a supplementary question or answer to go with it, that'll be limited probably to 30 seconds to try and have a constructive evening. The evening is likely to finish at about 9:15. Hopefully by then everybody will have had an opportunity to actually, if not ask their question, hear questions which are similar, and to have a feeling for the way they might vote, or you may vote this Thursday. So that is effectively what we've got on top table. Down in the room, there is a roaming microphone. So as and when there is a question raised from the floor, the microphone is available so that the whole of the room can hear the question from the person who's tabled it. But I go back to what I said earlier, we have probably 50 or 60 questions. Unfortunately, therefore, it won't be possible to answer or ask all those questions, so bear with me in the task of trying to bring those together in some form. Now, before we start, I think given the circumstances which have occurred during the run-up to the general election on Thursday, it would be proper and appropriate just to have a few moments silence to think of others who, unfortunately, have been caught up in the horror between the date of the election being announced and this Thursday. So just a few moments just to silently remember and think of other people. Thank you very much for that. I should say that I have got a gavel up here, which I brought to... Now, I know the sub-rooms is a possibility, but not tonight. To keep some form of control, what I would ask is for people to be courteous with each other, and also, when the questions have been raised, hopefully listen to the answers. So the gavel may get used occasionally, but I hope not, and I hope that we have a civil and interesting evening. So without further ado, the first person to speak from on top table is number 1 on my list, which is Sarah Lunnan.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you. I've given a lot of thought during this election campaign as to why I'm actually standing, and I've had to do that because I've been asked so many times, why are the Greens standing and why are we splitting an anti-Tory vote? Especially, and there's some validity to this, I think, especially since the Labour Party has rediscovered its socialist roots and is putting forward pretty much a large part of the Greens' 2015 manifesto. But they are doing so without understanding the underlying philosophical point of the Green Manifesto, and that is we have to defend our natural world. And if we do not do so, we do not have an economy, we do not have a community, we do not have a society. And although amongst the utter mass of issues that we have to think about and deal with at the moment, from our national security, from our personal debt, the refugee crisis, the list goes on and on. The functioning of our NHS, our school systems, we're being sold that this election is about Brexit. And actually, thinking just about Brexit can feel like a relief. Is it in, or should we stay in, or should we come out? And those of us who actually wanted to remain are actually being ignored and forgotten about during this election. And while we consider that, the daddy of all issues is being treated as a fringe show, climate change, because physics doesn't care whether we deal with our CO2 emissions or not. Our world will just carry on remorselessly getting warmer and warmer. And none of the other parties sitting up here with me, although they are addressing green issues, none of them understand the magnitude of the issue we are dealing with and the steps that we need to take. We need to reduce our CO2 emissions. I can't believe I've run out of time.
Thank you very much.
I will wind up. We need to reduce our CO2 emissions 50% decade upon decade, and I will finish there. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for that. And number 2 is Glenn Googly.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I would like to start by saying what happened over the past 3 months and over the past couple of weeks is truly horrible, and these despicable attacks must not have a place in our democracy. We must get rid of this evil ideology. It has no place and it must not continue. A little bit about myself. I've lived in the constituency for 13 years. I'm married with 2 daughters, Sian and Victoria. Sian's 17 and Victoria's 9. During the referendum, I was the Vote Leave coordinator for the constituency, and some of you might know me and have seen me around. I truly believe, as a person, that we have got a really, really bright future and a prosperous future outside the EU. I've worked in the retail industry for 32 years, so I know about business and I know the difficulties that businesses have. I also know about unemployment and how hard it is for young people these days to try and get a job in our society. So one of my things that I would like to champion is to get the young people in Stroud and within the country a job. My wife works in social care, and this has become a really strong issue for me. I don't want to see old age pensioners having a 15-minute call in the morning and a 15-minute call in the evening and not seeing anyone else throughout the day. We need a joined-up National Health Service that's fit for everyone. Thank you.
Well done. That was done with...
I am the UKIP candidate.
Thank you. And on that took us 2 minutes. He says, waiting till I finish. Thank you very much. Number 3 is Max Williamson.
That's not number 3. Can you hear me if I stand up? My name is Max Wilkinson, in fact.
Beg your pardon. I beg your pardon.
If you were expecting Max Williamson, then
maybe
he's out in the crowd. Are you there? No.
Okay.
I'm Max Wilkinson. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate. I'm 33 years old, and the main distinguishing feature about me is that I'm bald. So if any of you are experiencing any glare from my shiny head, I do apologise. So, the one thing I've learned about Stroud over the past few weeks is that Stroud has an insatiable appetite for politics. This is, believe it or not, the 9th Hustings that we've had in this constituency, so I feel like these guys on either side are more like my best friends than my lovely partner who sits in the front row there. Probably because I've spent so much time with them. Yeah. I'm standing in this election because I believe the Liberal Democrats and I on the ballot paper offer a unique vision for Stroud at this election. I'm a pro-European person. I'm a pro-European candidate. I campaigned to remain in the referendum, and I know Stroud voted overwhelmingly to remain. I still believe that the UK should remain in the European Union, and I think that the UK, if it does have to leave, needs to maintain the strongest possible links with the EU. What I want to do, if I'm your next MP, is ensure that you will get a say on the Brexit deal. So whatever is negotiated between whoever is in charge and the European Union, you'll have a say. And one of those options on the ballot paper will be to remain in the European Union. That is a message that is unique among these parties. Actually, the Greens have the same.
Thank you.
Sorry, Sarah. But what I'm disappointed about is that Neil is a pro-European Conservative and David, who is from a pro-European party, have sort of given up the ghost on this. So I think the Liberal Democrats are offering something unique as far as that goes to people who care about our relations with the rest of the world. But of course, that's not the only thing this election is about. This election is about public services as well. And as a Liberal Democrat, I'm standing for, someone said it right, I think, I'm standing for more investment in our schools. I don't want the Conservatives to get away with £32 million cuts to Gloucestershire schools. I want to protect per pupil funding. I want to make sure that all our children get a good education, not just those who can afford it or who can get into grammar schools. I want to make sure that class sizes aren't growing, and I want to make sure that kids who have special educational needs get the teaching assistance that they need so they don't sink in the classroom. And also, I am unique because I am a Liberal and I believe in human rights and civil liberties. If you vote for me, you'll get all of those things, and I promise I'll work tirelessly for this constituency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought that Max deserved an extra few seconds on the basis I got the surname wrong, so I should never forget it again.
Thank you.
So number 4 is Neil Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's great to be here, and good evening to you all. This is another general election. We've had a few contests in recent years. One of them was a referendum, and you all know which side I was on last year. I fought to keep Britain in the European Union, and I want to start off by saying that far from giving up, I am absolutely determined that the 48% and everybody is properly represented during the course of time that we take to leave the European Union. Because whilst we have to accept that there was a majority in favour of leaving the European Union, what we must do is avoid at all costs burning bridges with the European Union, and we want to end up with a situation where we are good friends with the EU 27 and have good relationships with the EU institutions, so that we can have our supply chains properly maintained, that we do manage to have proper trade agreements, and we can travel easily around and about the European Union. So that is a sort of a set of priorities that I have for this really important issue. You know I fought hard to keep us in. You can be sure that I will fight hard next to make sure that whatever deal that we have is the right deal for this country, and that is a good deal for us and the European Union continuing to work together. The second area of policy which I want to talk about is the economy. We do need to have an economy which is able to deliver the kind of prosperity necessary to ensure that our public services deliver for us. That's why it's so important that we have people going to work. We've now got, in this constituency, a really low level of unemployment, and we've got a lot of people going into employment which is taking them to better things still. And that's actually about making sure that people have the skills and the training in order to get the jobs, retain their jobs, and develop their jobs. And that is one of the reasons I set up the Festival of Manufacturing and Engineering.
That's
and
your time up,
also
Neil.
one of the reasons I'm so proud to be chair of the Education Select Committee.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you've all guessed that number 5 is David Drew.
Well, good evening, everyone, and I'm the Labour and Cooperative candidate in this general election. Now, I argue from the outset that this general election was unnecessary, undesirable, and dangerous. Unfortunately, my prescience has been proved all too correct. It was based on a false premise that this was all about giving Theresa May a stronger bargaining position in her negotiations with the EU. It was nothing of the sort. It was about trying to get a stonking great Conservative majority. And I am pledged to stop that, with your help in Stroud, because, as I have argued regularly, even when I was part of one, landslides do not make for good government. And it would be an absolute tragedy on the back of the divisiveness of the referendum campaign that we end up with one party trying to pretend it can represent all the different issues that it has to face up to in this very, very difficult time. But I have been overjoyed at one other factor that has come into play, which is generational politics. In this election, young people have demanded to have a say, and they are having a say. And I hope they will come out in the numbers that they should be coming out to make sure that their world is not determined by some of us older people. Thirdly, I want to end austerity. Austerity has been a political programme that has been entirely about trying to break the poor, not dealing with the real problems of inequality and fairness. But also, this is a parliamentary election. As much as it's about leadership, it's about who you want to represent you at a local level, to talk about the jobs, the health, the education, the environment, including climate change. That matters. It's always mattered to me. And I hope that you will think about that when you cast your vote, because it's so important that we have a say in Stroud.
Thank you. I think that was a good opening of tonight's proceedings. As I said earlier, we have a goodly number of questions, and I've tried to marshal those while the introductions have taken place. I've spotted a pattern, and I will do my best to try and cover those within the questions. We'll start with one which is, it's a short version here, but there's a few that come out in these questions, which is to do with, and it's to all on the tables. Question: there has been much talk in the media of progressive alliance and strategic voting. What is your opinion on voting in such a way? And we won't go in the same order as we started, so we'll go in different order. And can I start with Max?
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you asked me about this, because as a Liberal Democrat, everyone thinks that I can't win here. And I'm here to tell you that I can win, and you should cast your ballot for me because, as I said before, I am offering a unique vision. I am the pro-European candidate. If you like the European Union, so do I. But also, what I would say is tactical voting in this election is neither here nor there, because of that very reason about the European Union. The more you vote for a candidate who represents your view, and if that view is a pro-European one, the more it will tell the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, who, let's face it, are the most likely parties to be forming the next government, the more it will tell them that actually what we need to do is take notice of that voice, the voice of the people who, as Sarah said, are basically being ignored in this election. Labour and the Conservatives have set out their stall, and it is clear that they are both going for a hard Brexit out of the single market. And the more we say that's not the right thing to do, the better it will be for the rest of the country. And on a broader point about tactical voting and the Progressive Alliance, I think it really actually patronises people. The concept that if I stood down, all my voters would suddenly magically vote for David is just wrong. The concept that if Sarah stood down, all of her voters would vote for David is wrong. The truth is that people go in all kinds of different directions, and we shouldn't patronise them by assuming exactly what they think and exactly what they will do in the event that their first choice candidate is not on the ballot paper. And what I will say at this stage, actually, is that some of the vitriol that Sarah's had to put up with in particular since the start of the campaign has been frankly unacceptable. And there's no place for that. There is no place for that. I appreciate the Labour Party really wants to win, but there's no place for that in our democracy. People should not be shouted down for daring to stand in an election in a democracy where we are all free to have our say and put our name on the ballot paper. And going back to something that Glenn mentioned about the terror attacks at the beginning, one of the things I'm most proud of is that we all have that opportunity here. The terrorists, they don't want us to have that opportunity. They hate that. They hate those freedoms, they hate the fact that we can say what we want, and they hate the fact we have open and fair elections. By casting your vote for the candidate that you want to be your MP, you are telling not just the terrorists, but everyone else, that you reject that kind of cynical politics.
Thank you very much. And I think if we do Glenn next, please.
Thank you. UKIP proved a point during the referendum, and it proved if you believe in something and you truly want something to happen, if you vote for that party that you truly believe in, you can change the political landscape. And I really, really believe that. People say to me, why is UKIP still here? What's the use of UKIP now? We have still got a really big job to do. Article 50 has only just been triggered, so there is still a lot of work for us to do. And I'm here for all the people who did vote leave to make sure that we get the deal that we really need and really want for this country. And for the people in the room that did vote to leave, I am here to make sure that deal that you voted for is put through and properly on the table. And I'll work hard for everyone in the constituency.
Thank you very much. Sarah, would you like to go next?
Thank you. I think there is some merit in a progressive alliance if the parties could get together and agree particular headline issues. And I think the fundamental issue that they would have to agree on would be that the elected representative would work to bring about a proportional representative voting system. Because what happens at the moment is, and it's happening now in Stroud, is that people are voting for the lesser of two evils, rather than voting for what they want. And if you don't vote for what you want, you do not get it. And Glenn actually made a very good point. UKIP, in all of its history, has managed to elect a single MP, just one. But because their voters actually went, do you know what? For me, this is now the single most important overriding issue, and I'm going to vote for a UKIP candidate, and I do not care about anything else. Because they did that, they changed the political landscape. It's amazing. It's that the impact that that party has had. I mean, the millions of pounds in funding has obviously helped as well. But it has been remarkable. So, yes, there is some merit if you get to change the electoral system, but also, Green voters, if what you want is a green agenda, then UKIP has shown there is only one way to do it. And if Green voters keep voting tactically, we will never get that green agenda.
Neil, like to go next, please?
Of course, I'd like you to all vote Conservative. In this audience, I'm sensing those vibes. So keep on going. But I think the serious point is made by Max. We are in a pluralist society. That's where we have different groups, different organisations, different political parties, and all of those, and none, have every right to contest elections, to be part of our society, to be part of the democratic ethos that we've got. And of course, he's also right when he points out that what we're suffering at the moment are attacks on our values, and those values are all about freedom, choice, parliamentary activity, elections, and so forth. And the one thing we must always remember is that what we have in our society, those opportunities, are really precious. And we've got to make sure that they stay with us. So the first point I say is, yes to pluralism, and it is for us. The second point I would say is that actually Parliament is a great place where a lot of churn takes place. It may not look like that happens, but actually it does. And that is, I think, where our democracy really works and works extraordinarily well. And so when you vote, Conservative hopefully, but perhaps for other parties as well, What we'll end up with is a collection of parties which represent everybody in this country in some way or another. And those issues can actually get distilled and sorted out. And if you don't think you're represented, you're not supporting a party big enough to get those representative positions. So I would say be pluralist, recognise Parliament actually does work, it works for this country. And I would say also, whilst I'm on my feet talking about this general subject, don't have too many more referendums because they can go wrong.
Thank you for that. And David, if you'd like to answer the question as well.
Well, of course, we have a progressive alliance in Stroud because we run the district council according to a progressive alliance between Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. And it works very well. It's been difficult, like all families, we have our little spats, but we've done it because we were determined to stop the Conservatives from taking over in Stroud District. And we've done that for about 5 years now. So it can be done because we've got much more in common than that which divides us. But I am an electoral reformer. I have been an electoral reformer for a long, long time. And I believe that people should vote positively. The problem with our current first-past-the-post system is that it's a negative voting entity, if you like, because you often vote to stop who you don't want or dislike most compared to who you really want. My only qualification is I do believe in the representative role of the Member of Parliament, and that was the problem with the alternative vote referendum, which was a very funny referendum to have, because it was an even less proportionate system that we would have ended up with. And what we have at the moment with first past the post is when you get the 42%, winner effectively takes all. Well, under alternative vote, winner takes absolutely everything. So that would have been a backward step, though some of us who believe in electoral reform had to try and pretend that that was the system we went for. So let's get electoral reform. Let's do it through a progressive alliance, because there is a lot to be said for building that solidarity, that commonality. And I think that Stroud, as always, can lead the way. We have our disagreements with our own parties. Well, hell, that's nothing unusual in my respect. But it's more important that we do take that forward, because otherwise Stroud wouldn't be governed as well as it is now. And I like to think it is being governed quite well.
I think they should all be congratulated on more or less staying within their 2 minutes. So how about that? Also, it's catching me out because I thought you'd go a bit long and I'd be almost ready for the next question. So I think the safest one to go for, because it's, as you might imagine, one that's been asked by lots of people, and I'm going to add a few that have come in tonight. This is to do with Brexit. Simple start. Following the outcome of the referendum last year, the negotiation of Brexit will cover trade, laws of the land and immigration. Which of those three do you think are the most important? And I'll carry on. This is one from John Marjoram. Why isn't the EU referendum being discussed amongst politicians at this election, as the decision will have a bigger impact on this country in the long term than this current election? This is from the floor. It says, why should we see a 52-48 vote with little information be enough to make Brexit inevitable forever? And then we have another one. What, from your perspective, constitutes a bad deal for Brexit? And could no deal mean staying in the EU? Another one, what are your thoughts regarding the... No, that's another one for later. We'll cover that later. Right, I think that gets us started. And I think this time we'll go in a different order, as you might imagine. And I'll start with Sarah. Sarah Lemon, please.
Brexit. Great. It's Brexit and our relationship with Europe is one of those issues which we did boil down to a binary issue, but ultimately it's much, much more complicated than that. And even those of us who wanted to remain within the EU accepted and recognised that there were some real problems and some real issues. If you're on the left, The European Union is variously described as a boss's club, that it's been set up for trade, for the benefit of business rather than ordinary people. And yet, some of the human rights, some of the protections that have been given to people, the environmental protections, they did come out of Europe. There were benefits for the people of this country of belonging to Europe. The freedom of travel, the ability for us to move, and to be European. When I woke up after the referendum, I mourned. There was a loss of my identity because I viewed myself as a European and it had been taken away from me. And even now, I still feel bereft about that. And I think, even more importantly, belonging to the EU, accepting the rules of the EU, gives us access to a bigger and more powerful voice. And that is really, really important. And it's going to become more important because of the actions of Donald Trump and withdrawing from the Paris Agreement on climate change. We should be part of that wider organisation that can have those arguments on the world stage, that can make decisions, that can pull other partners with them and take action to defend our natural world. And as America has left the Paris Agreement, we are going to need that larger voice to keep moving forward with climate change. And we are about to leave that very club just as it becomes more important. So I haven't really answered the question there. I'm sorry about that. But I do think that it is fundamentally important for us to remain within the EU.
Neil, would you like to go next, please?
Thank you, Andrew. When you look at the complications of leaving the European Union, one of the things you should do actually is remember how hard it was for us to get into the European Union. We had 3 goes in 1962, 1967, and finally successfully in 1972. And those goes were really complicated. They required a huge amount of work by the leaders who attempted it, Harold Macmillan, Ted Heath, Harold Wilson. They all worked really hard because it was worth working for, but there were always obstacles in their way. And so it seems to me that as we set out to leave, we're going to find similar sorts of obstacles in our way. And we're going to have to be able to negotiate around those. And I think it'll take a lot longer than everybody speculates. And I also think that if we're really astute, we'll get the kind of deal that leaves open the option for us to reconsider our relationship with the European Union once we have left. And I really do think that's an important point. And all of us must have it in mind, because it's not just the binary choice we've got to deal with, although that is an obvious problem. It is, in fact, that the decision to leave the European Union will have ramifications over all the policy areas you can possibly think of. John Marshall, who asked the question about trade, about immigration, about the rule of law, I think he mentioned, and so on. That's also true about climate change. It's true about manufacturing and supply chains. So there are complications, and we must be attuned to those and ready to negotiate properly. Because our ultimate ambition is to see the European Union work, to see our relationship with the European successful, and to make it possible for us to have a dialogue with the European Union that is beneficial for the Western world generally and the globe in particular. Because that's how it works, and that's why Winston Churchill, Harold Macmillan, Margaret Thatcher, and all of the other leaders wanted us to be part of it.
Thank you very much.
And so we must make sure their vision is actually still saluted.
Why did you follow May through the lobby then?
Thank you. Right, next person to speak, David Drew, please.
Thank you, Andrew. This is a really complicated question now, because I don't know if any of you saw the Financial Times story the other day, but there are something like 750 different treaties and agreements that will have to be renegotiated with the EU. Now, you know, I'm an old-fashioned Eurosceptic. I want a socialist Europe, which is why I had misgivings about the EU, because to me it was far too corporate and not based enough around environmental, labour rights, and a degree of nation-state involvement rather than full integration. But I voted Remain because I thought the case made by the Brexiteers was entirely fallacious. It was wrong, and we have ended up with the worst of all worlds. Look, my perspective on this is there won't be any deal. There isn't the time. As I say, 750 odd separate negotiations. We haven't got the negotiators. 40 of those are about nuclear, around Euratom. Now, I have to say, for all the amount we can have some criticism, and we may argue for or against nuclear power, the idea that you can just pull out of Euratom and that does anything other than, if you like, cause consternation amongst the Iranians and so on who've tried to come into some form of agreement so that we have some peaceful use of nuclear, I mean, it's just a horrifying thought. What we need to recognise now is that the divisiveness of this has got to be moved on so that we do look at how we can build a decent relationship. I'll be honest with you, I never want another referendum in this country. I argued for a referendum because I thought it would be a once and for all decision. It has been so divisive that I never want to see that. And I think that, dare I say, political parties who abdicated responsibility by going for a referendum, one at least of them has to put in its manifesto in the next 5 years to say we will re-enter the EU. Then that will clarify where we get to.
Max, would you like to go next, please?
Absolutely, I would. This is one of my favourite topics. So there were several questions there, and I'll just read some of them back to remind everyone on the panel. So it was, why isn't Brexit being talked about? The offset of trade laws and immigration, which is the most important thing to do with the EU, 52 v 48, and what about a bad deal and what about staying in? Well, let's start off with why isn't it being discussed? And that's because it's very inconvenient for the two main political parties to discuss it. What have we had from Theresa May, the Prime Minister? She called the election on the basis that, you know, she wanted a mandate to do Brexit. And then what did she tell us? Exactly. She told us nothing about it. How can anyone be expected? How can anyone be expected to vote Conservative on the basis of an election that was called on Brexit when she's refused to say anything about Brexit other than it will be strong and stable and she will do it the best out of anyone? What a load of nonsense. And of course it's uncomfortable for Labour because until June the 23rd last year they were a pro-European party and they've completely given up on that. So unfortunately it's not being discussed because the two main political parties of the establishment don't want it to be discussed. As far as what's most important about the Brexit and about the EU, well, David mentioned that he thought it would be less corporate, it should be less corporate and more about workers' rights. Well, what about the right to maternity leave that's enshrined in EU law? What about the right to annual leave that's enshrined in EU law? What about the Equal Pay Act, which is enshrined in EU law and driven by the EU? What about anti-discrimination laws, which are enshrined in EU law? What about the health and safety laws, which are enshrined in EU law? If that's corporate, then I don't know why we wouldn't want to be part of that corporate stuff, because that, to me, all sounds like really good ideas. And to take up the point about 52 v 48%, and just to relate that back to the election that Theresa May called, it seems to me that if she gets any less than 52%, then in fact her mandate for a Brexit will have been absolutely reduced. She has to get more than 52%, which was the threshold that was set at the referendum last year. Otherwise, we can only judge that she has failed to make the case for it. And finally, it would be a bloody bad thing if we had a bad deal, because all the prices would go up in the shops and we'd have tariffs and all of our stuff that was being exported would be more expensive. So
Thank you.
We're all losing out.
I'm endeavouring to not show any favouritism because there isn't any. So number 5 this time is Glenn.
Yes, with trade, we do need a good deal. But we can get if we get into a situation where there is no deal that is right for the country, then we should walk away. World Trade Organization tariffs have actually been bartered down between 2 and 4%. UKIP is in favour of fair trade. Ethiopia exports coffee beans to Germany, and because of the EU tariffs, they can only make about 1.6 billion euros from that. But Germany exports those roasted coffee beans from there all around the world and makes 2.6 billion. So we believe in fair trade. We need to come away from the single market, and we cannot control our skills immigration if we're in the single market. When I was campaigning with Vote Leave, me and my team, we talked about the 5 Presidents' report, and none of the other parties probably talked about that, and I don't think many people actually know what that is. This is a roadmap from from now to 2025 that puts us, that the EU wants to converge more, they want to have tax raising, so they want to control fiscal matters, which includes tax raising matters. If we leave the EU as well, we can take back control of our fisheries, which is an industry that has really, really suffered. And that industry would then really boom, and we could then invest in our seaside towns, which are really suffering at the moment. That's because they've been fished by other countries in the EU. Okay? Max says that he supports the outcome of the referendum, and then in the next sentence he says he would like to have another EU referendum. Doesn't quite add up, Max. Okay?
10 seconds.
When we leave the EU, we will then repeal all those laws, so all the employment laws and disability laws and everything, and they would be enshrined in British law. So I don't think there's an argument there as well.
Thank you very much. The next one, again, I'm embracing a number of questions raised by people tonight. I'll start with the general one, which you'll then see where it's going, I'm sure. Prior to calling a snap general election, the Conservative government announced the expansion of grammar schools throughout the United Kingdom. Given the current change in funding and the shortfall being experienced by some schools in this area, are you in favour or are you against selective schools? There's then a question which is very detailed as to the funding of schools within Gloucestershire, and I would hope that that will be addressed. If I listen to the answers, if it needs a supplementary one, I will add that at the end. And I'll add this one in as well, which is plans for children with special educational needs are to be reviewed. Does anyone know what changes will be made, and will more money be made available for vulnerable children? So keeping up on education. And then I'll read this again on grammar schools. How would you oppose the plan to increase grammar schools in the light of the clear evidence that this is not an effective use of precious resources? Local schools, free severe cuts, and the chair of the Education Select Committee has repeatedly argued against this. So that's the topic this time, which is grammar schools education. And I'll start this, if I may, with David Drew.
The problem with the grammar school debate is it's a complete smokescreen at the moment. The reality of our schools is that they are desperately underfunded. They have gone over a cliff edge this year. And as I've said in previous hustings, Neil and I were warned when we met the secondary heads back in 2014. They laid it out very clearly that come 2017, schools would face huge financial problems. And they are. If you go and look at any of your children's or grandchildren's schools at the moment, you will see the impact of those cuts. Cuts in staffing, cuts in capitation, cuts in ancillary staff. So why are we having the grammar school debate? Look, we've got grammar schools here. My kids went to comprehensives. I believe in comprehensive education. I think it's a wrong form of education because of the way in which social immobility is driven out at the age of 11. That cannot be right or fair. But it's worse than that. We've had all these wonderful experiments over the last 7 years of free schools, forced academisation. Now, I know Labour introduced academies. I had some misgivings, but they were done on a voluntary basis. Now, we have to see our local authority schools driven towards the academisation to form these wild and wonderful chains, which are businesses. And funny enough, with businesses, they fail. And when they fail, it's your kids who suffer because, of course, what goes on is that somebody's got to bail them out, usually the state. So we've got a situation where there was agreement amongst the parties that we were gradually comprehensivising our education system. That existed under Thatcher. Thatcher got rid of more grammar schools than any other Secretary of State, which is a fascinating statistic. Went all the way through from the 80s to the 90s, and now we are faced by this dilemma of having a debate that we don't need, because the debate we should be having is how do we put funding back into our schools?
Thank you, David. Glenn, would you like to go next, please?
Yes. Thank you.
Sorry.
One size.
Doesn't mean you're finished, by the way.
That was quick.
Doesn't time fly when you're enjoying yourself?
I personally believe one size doesn't fit all. People and children learn at different rates, different learning rates. So we believe in UKIP, yes, there should be more grammar schools, but there should be more grammar schools in each and every town throughout the country.
Thank you.
This will then help children from poorer backgrounds improve their social mobility, and they'll be able to move into a grammar school. Now, David actually talked about during the 80s, Margaret Thatcher got rid of a lot of the grammar schools and they turned into comprehensive. Well, I actually went to one of those grammar schools that had been changed to a comprehensive. And we still had a lot of the grammar school teachers there, and they were absolutely fantastic. But I'm not saying that the teachers we've got now are not fantastic, because they are fantastic, and they need more support. What I would like to say is that UKIP, as a policy, wants to make sure that we, in a sense, split education into two sort of streams. So you'll have an academic stream, and you'll also have like a German-based model vocational scheme. So you'll have more technical skills and so forth. We believe in that. We also believe that obviously schools need proper funding, and yes, the funding model doesn't need looking at again, and we need to make sure that all schools get the right funding. But we believe that everyone learns at different rates. Some people are good at technical skills, and some people are good at academic skills. And that's what I truly believe, and the UKIP as a party believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil, would you like to go next, please?
Well, as I have said frequently, I think the debate about the grammar schools is a distraction from what's really important, and that is the focus that we need to have on making sure that young people can get the skills that they need for the work opportunities that are clearly emerging in a modern economy. I would say about the grammar schools that if we insist on pursuing them, I would want to see not just 11-year-olds, but 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds being able to go to an academic school through a route which I think would be within a multi-academy trust. And the second thing is, I'm not satisfied that the social mobility argument is strong enough to justify schools, more grammar schools in every area and so on. So that's my thought on grammar schools. I'm getting a cheer, thank you. Got a bit more. The second point I would make is that I'm really pleased that we have actually put the spotlight on skills, because that's where it needs to be. We've done that in Parliament, but we've also done it in this constituency through being able to bring £30 million worth of investment to Berkeley Green in two parts. One, to make sure that lots of young people can get training in manufacturing or renewable energy, and that lots more can go to a university technical college fully focused on engineering and cyber studies. All of that is really good news, because it's about a modern economy giving young people the opportunities to effectively take the skills, develop the skills, and get the jobs that they need. And it matters to you because actually what we need is an economy which is innovative, which does actually think about productivity and new ideas, and of course the foundations of those are through technology, through engineering and design. Don't forget design. Now, on school funding, it is true that we need to have more money for our schools. That's why the Conservatives have pledged a further £4 billion on schools. Don't forget that we've got early years to think about, further education to think about, and universities. But the schools budget itself does need to be expanded, and it will be if we win power.
Thank you, Neil. Max, would you like to go next, please?
Thank you. Another one of my favourite topics, and I'm not being disrespectful by taking my jacket off, but it's just roasting under these lights. So, am I for or against grammar schools? I'm against grammar schools, and I don't think we should be expanding grammar schools. And the reason I'm against it is because it's very socially divisive, firstly, and secondly, judging a child on what they can do in a test, age 10, I think is the wrong thing to do. It's not fair. Having said that, if there are people in the room who go to grammar schools, and if there are parents in the room who send their children to grammar schools, I applaud your decision. You're making exactly the right choice for your situation, and there is nothing wrong with that. But all the evidence shows that what happens if you send children to grammar schools is some children who were probably going to do quite well already do slightly better in their exams, and the rest of the cohort does significantly worse. And that's just not the right way to set up our state education system, and it shouldn't be what the Conservatives are pursuing. I'm pleased Neil agrees with us, but actually his party does not.
You'd be surprised.
I won't be. I won't be surprised if you win the election. So that's on grammar schools. Special educational needs. Well, of course, what we need to do is make sure that every time a new policy is brought in by the government about education, there is an assessment of what impact that specifically will have on the most vulnerable children in the education system, those with special educational needs. And to tie that back into the point about funding, one of the things that will happen if we have the funding cuts to schools that the Tories are suggesting, and they are putting more money in than ever before, but not more money per pupil. And that means that class sizes get bigger and teaching assistants are lost. And the teaching assistants are the ones that are the key link to those with SEN. So what you will see is those kids starting to sink in classrooms, and that's not the right thing to do. I think...
You've got 15 seconds to go.
15 seconds to go. Let's see what else I can say. And finally, if we thought that grammar schools were going to solve the problem for kids, I won't say working class because I reject the class that sort of system, but if we thought that kids from poorer backgrounds were going to do better in grammar schools, I'm sure we would all support it. But that isn't what happens. They get left behind, and kids who are going to do well anyway get into grammar schools. That is true.
Thank you. I think Sarah's already guessed that you are next.
Any politician who wants to bring back grammar schools actually should probably go back to school and learn how to understand an evidence base, because there is a lot of evidence around grammar schools, and it is exactly as Max and David have said. It does very little for those bright children who would do well anyway, but what it does do is it impacts negatively on those children at the bottom of the cohort. It is not good for our children to select at 10 years old, and we should get rid of it altogether. It sounds okay to bring back grammar schools, but calling for the return of secondary moderns is not often greeted with applause because they were unwanted and unloved. We should not bring back grammar schools. There should be no selection, and the Green Party actually would like to see a fundamental change to the way that we've organised education at the moment. We would like to see all of our schools brought back within local authority control. We have a disparate selection of schools. There is no overall control. In fact, in parts of Gloucestershire, there are children desperate for schools, having to be bussed around the place because they cannot get into the local school, and there is no authority anymore to demand to organise those schools to expand. It is madness. And yes, Max and David are also right. We need to look at funding our schools properly. we are doing our children a disservice. There are other issues with our education system, too much testing, too much inspection, we need a finished model, but looking at funding them properly would be a start.
And look at that for timing. Right. We move on to the National Health Service next, and we'll do the opening gambit, and then there are two questions, one of which I will actually ask somebody to speak from the floor in a second, because it was a very long and detailed question which came forward, and rather than précis it, we'll do it that way. So in a moment, I'd like the microphone to find Hannah Basson, but to start off, the NHS question to our 5 worthies on the top. By all accounts, the National Health Service is in serious financial trouble. What would you do to support the National Health Service, and in particular the provision within the Stroud constituency? And then, running on before Hannah speaks, we have one here which says, what word would candidates use to describe the following? Management of non-emergency ambulances and out-of-hours GPs in Gloucestershire, changing from National Health Service South West Ambulance, NHS Foundation Trust, to a private company as Arriva and Care UK, respectively, and do they think these companies manage services? So, do they manage the services well? Thank you very much. And so is Hannah with the... If you'd like to stand up and just ask your question, if you'd be so kind.
I work for the NHS. My patient group have lifelong diseases. I have a patient who wants to work, and he set up an extra appointment in order to talk about how much more he could do to find work. But on that particular day, due to the multiple issues people like him face on a daily basis, he didn't make his appointment. He got sanctioned. He already had no money. That's why he wants to work, and he was behind on his rent. He, like many I meet every day at work, do not have the emotional or mental strength or tools to deal with a cruel system that knocks them back at every turn. This is just one example of a fast increasing number that I witness constantly. What would you do about this?
And that's the National Health Service question, and I'll start with Neil, if I may, please.
Well, thank you very much. I'll try to answer your question and Hannah's question together, I think. First of all, the Conservative government will increase again the total amount of money spent on the NHS by further 8 billion. That's our commitment. We think that's really important. We understand that more and more people are needing to access the NHS because actually more and more people are getting older and with chronic conditions which require more support. And that's why we've raised the issue too about social care. It's also why it's so important we look at things like diagnosis and we get that right. I'm personally chair of the all-party group on vascular disease. It's a problem in this area because we have variants which is not good for us in the southwest generally and this constituency particularly. So what we've got to do is look at diagnosis and encourage people to think about their own responsibility in terms of personal health. That is one of the areas that I think we need to be exploring, and it's also a reason why we need to invest in technology and support the right kind of training of staff so that things like vascular disease can be dealt with efficiently and effectively. Now, of course, sanctioning is a real problem, and I fully accept that. What I think we need to do is change the system so it's less about sanctions and more about assistance and guidance. The Secretary of State in charge of this, Damien Green, is thinking very carefully about how these things might be done, because what we do not want to see, and what I certainly find to be abhorrent, is individuals effectively forced to do something which they plainly should not be forced to do, and being punished for it if they resist. What we should instead be doing is helping people to get to work, because actually work is, for many people, a really good thing. think of the opportunities it gives you about not just economic advantage, but also social advantage.
Thank you,
And
Neil.
I think that's an important point.
Max, if we can go to you next, please.
Thank you. The lady asked a very moving question there, and I think she was alluding to something called the Work Capability Assessment, which has been proven to be a pretty pernicious thing. It does target people who are in a very vulnerable situation, who potentially aren't able to make ends meet, and it asks them to do some fairly humiliating tests, and quite often they're assessed by someone who is not a healthcare professional. They're assessed by someone who is potentially there to shamefully tick a box, and sometimes it even hit a target for sanctioning enough people and removing the benefits from enough people. And that's got to stop now. It's not fair and it's not right. And in a country as rich as ours, and in a country as humane as ours, with our record and our NHS, it just shouldn't be happening. So what would we replace it with? Well, the Liberal Democrat policy is to replace with what would be called a real-life assessment. So that would be a similar assessment, but it would be carried out in a much more, it wouldn't be a tick-box way. It wouldn't just be a part of the bureaucracy. And it certainly wouldn't be administered by someone who's there with the target of removing the benefits from X number of people. It would be administered by a healthcare professional who's actually properly qualified to make an assessment about whether those people are fit or are not fit to go to work. I agree with Neil, work is very important, but it's not important enough to force people who can't get there and who can't carry out everyday tasks in the workplace. It's not important enough to force them to do it against their will and forcing them into a position where they'll feel very uncomfortable and it will make them more unhealthy. And the Conservative government has a lot to answer for there, and specifically, so does Ian Duncan-Smith. As far as I think there was a question about ambulance services and delivery by private companies. I think the main thing that we need to recognise here is that the South West Ambulance Service hasn't traditionally been doing very well. It routinely misses its targets for getting to people on time. And if we've got private companies that are delivering things, you would expect them to be hitting their targets.
Glenn, would you like to go next, please?
Yes. The simple thing we have to do is get the funding right, and we all know that. There needs to be a joined-up healthcare system where the NHS and social care are one and joined up, and also mental health care. We as a party would do away with PFI, which was brought in by John Major and then followed through with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. And the private finance initiatives financed £11.8 billion worth of build, but the build for those is going to be about £80 billion, which the NHS can't afford. So we need to get rid of those. Now, coming to the lady's question about disabled people and people with degenerative diseases, why do we, as a country, continually test someone if they've got a degenerative disease? We know that disease is going to get bad, so why do we keep testing them? So we would do away with PIPs, and any tests that are done will be done by a health professional, which is only right. With the benefits being cut, we would protect the benefits. 250,000 people lost their benefits over the past year or so. Out of those people, 6 out of 10 people who queried it and wanted their benefits back actually got their benefits back. So again, why are we testing people and taking benefits away? It's costing more money, it's more bureaucracy. Now, with the mental health care as well, I'd like to say me and Sarah went to, we had an invitation by the Wootton Lane Hospital in Gloucester, which is the Together Trust, which is one of the main centres for mental health care in the constituency and within the county. And they are doing really, really fantastic work. All the candidates were invited, but like I say, me and Sarah turned up. And I truly believe that this needs to be joined up with the NHS as well.
10 seconds.
Okay. So a joined-up healthcare system, properly funded, we would divert money from the foreign aid budget, which is 0.7% of GDP, down to 0.2%. And actually, you say...
Thank you.
Can I just finish this one point?
Keep going quickly.
Right. If we went down to 0.2%, we would still be putting in the same amount of money that Italy and Portugal put together. So we're not taking money away, we're just diverting it.
Thank you very much. Sarah, would you like to go next, please?
Thank you. I don't think, and the Green Party doesn't think, that sanctions have got any place in our benefit system. It should not be happening. There is no way in this country that anybody should reach the point where they are so desperate for food that they have to visit a food bank. And the Green Party has a proposal of something called a citizen's income, which would mean that by right, as a citizen of this country, you would have paid to you an income every single week. Non-negotiable, nobody can take it away from you. And a number of things run on from that fact. If you want to take part-time work, you can. If you want to take voluntary work, you can. If you don't know what you can do, you can take things in incremental steps because you always have your income to fall back on. And this is not Green Party madness. This is something which is being trialled in various countries across the world. And it's something that as the sixth richest country in the world, we should be able to do. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll talk to you afterwards if you like. The other thing we can do as the sixth... They clap. Can I carry on?
Yeah, carry on.
As the sixth richest country is address the funding gap in our National Health Service. We have seen admissions rise in the last 5 years by 3.6%, and the funding has risen by 0.7%. So we are actually reducing the amount of money we spend on individual people. We spend less money than our European neighbours. We need to address that fact. It's not can we afford it, it's how can we not afford it. And the other thing we need to do is stop privatising our NHS.
During the applause, the timer went. 10 seconds.
Thank you. We are currently privatising the NHS at a rate of 1% every 2 years. It has to stop. And what do I think about private companies running our ambulance services? I think they're profit-driven and they are not providing us with the service we deserve.
I know a little run over because of the clapping, and that's not to try and encourage you to keep clapping and keep it going, by the way. So, David Drew, would you like to answer this question or questions?
I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to take a very local perspective on this because having been on the Hospital Trust and a member of the League of Friends, I feel passionately about our hospitals here in Stroud, which doesn't mean that I don't think about the acute hospitals in Cheltenham and Gloucester, but we also have to think locally because our local hospitals matter to us. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to scrap these strategy and transformation plans. They are about asking our local services to make cuts. And we do not agree with those cuts. They have to look at the way in which services are funded properly. And we have a model in Gloucestershire. We can feel quite proud because we've got a better model of integration between our NHS and our social care, but it is desperately underfunded. And the only way in which we can get that model working properly is if we put the money in. So I make no apology. We have to fund the NHS properly. And we have to tax in order to fund the NHS properly. The second point, which is about out of hours. Out of hours is a disaster. Yep. It's an unmitigated disaster now. We had a very good GP cooperative in Stroud. It ran perfectly all right, and it was removed. It was removed because of pure dogma. We've seen the ambulance service go the same way, and we've seen allied services follow in suit. This is ideology gone mad. The market does not do this better. It just does it more expensively. So why can we not go back to public service as being the driving force? Now, in terms of Hannah's point, I mean, again, we are committed now to scrap the work capability assessment and PIP, because they're both in there to bring in a sanction regime which is all about target driven. So the people in the job centre have to get people off their list and into work, no matter what the quality of the work, no matter what medical conditions they've got. As Sarah said quite rightly, this is inhumane, and this is not even good economics, because it fails because those people end up in our hospitals. That cannot be sane.
Thank
you. It cannot be right.
2 minutes. Thank you for those answers. The next one is, I'm going to cover two sides of this argument, or this question. I'll start with the first one. Should the outcome of this general election be inconclusive, and we are faced with a hung parliament, would you and your party consider a coalition, and if so, with whom? And two people have asked questions which I think go with this slightly, which is the question of proportional representation. One just says proportional representation, question mark, discussed. And then the other one is, would having a PR system improve voter involvement in the general election? So I'm embracing, the question is, would you be part of a coalition? And what is your views on PR? And let's start with somebody who hasn't started so far. And I will go to Glenn.
If elected, I would really want to get the UKIP's policies put forward. And I know that we have some really, really good, strong policies. We're not a one-policy party. We have got some really good funded policies in our manifesto. So if I'm elected, I would want to make my voice heard. Now, I'm not sure on the party line, but if it meant that I could get my voice heard, maybe if the deal was good, maybe we could go into a coalition. But I would need to make sure it was right for the country and right for the people of Stroud. With PR, yes, I think that we need to have a different electoral system. You know, the first past post system doesn't really work properly, you know, and I think people need to have the choice, and there needs to be more input from other parties so that we can get a better country for everyone.
Thank you. David, would you like to go as number 2, please?
Well, of course, all politicians say they're going to win the general election, so they don't need to talk about coalitions. I'll be realistic. We've had, as I said earlier, Progressive Alliance in Stroud. It's worked very well. I haven't got any problems about talking to the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. You know, I think it's important that we are grown up in our politics, but it depends on the numbers. I mean, I'm sorry, it all depends what the outcome is. You know, there may be this stonking great Conservative majority, so we don't have to worry about that. I hope it won't happen. I hope that we get a much more balanced Parliament, and I hope that we move on the progressive agenda. And that's what I said earlier. We've got more in common than divides us, and we have to be mature. Yeah, okay, I will fall out with the Labour Party, where there's nothing new there. You have to be able to make your position clear that we are moving into a different world. I think a number of us feel, because we've talked privately, that that world is welcome, it's inevitable, and we just have to face up to the reality of that. It may be unpalatable for some people in our parties, but it's more important we get good governance. Now, I think we will get good governance if we get electoral reform. I said that, I'm an electoral reformer. We can argue about the system, which is usually what bogs us down, but let's get the electoral reform. Let's build the Progressive Alliance. Let's get in Stroud what can now be taken forward and seen across the country.
They're trying to keep me on my toes here, you know. Max, would you like to go next, please?
Thank you. Coalition and proportional representation. two subjects on which Liberal Democrats have a lot to say, obviously. Coalition and with who? Well, at this election, we won't be going into a coalition with Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, nor will we be going into a coalition with Theresa May's Conservatives. That is because there are too many fundamental issues on which we have a completely different outlook at the moment. And that mainly boils down to the outlook on the UK's future with the rest of the world, and particularly the European Union. That is a fundamental differing point of difference that means that we just can't work with those two parties while they currently are led by those two people who are not committed to the European Union or our relations with the EU. Thank you. One person, that's a good start. But having said that, as a Liberal and as a pluralist, I'm very much in favour of politicians working with one another. In fact, it's so important that even within political parties there are coalitions working together. I'm sure Neil has experience of this recently as a pro-European in the Conservative Party. And David, as someone who has traditionally been to the left of his party, I'm sure he has similar experiences. And even in the Greens, they have the mangoes and the watermelons. So all political parties are to some extent made up of coalitions. And I welcomed the coalition for the main reason that it forced people who fundamentally disagreed with each other on so many issues, not as fundamental as Europe, it forced them to sit down in a room and work together for 5 years. And actually, I thought that was a very successful thing, if not always in policy. It was a very successful thing in terms of how politicians did things for 5 years. Unfortunately, we've gone back to a bit of the squabbly stuff since then. As for proportional representation, what I want to happen is if a party gets 10% of the vote in a general election, it gets 10% of the seats. How can it be fair that a party that's going to get maybe 40% gets maybe 60% or 70% of the seats in Parliament? That isn't the way to do it. And
Thank you for that.
Very briefly, if we tell people that their voice doesn't count at the ballot box, what we get is the kind of result that means that parties like UKIP and Brexit end up being people's choice. And that's not the country I want to see.
Thank you for that. Sarah, would you like to go next, please?
I pretty much agree with Max in what he said on PR. How can it be fair that parties that receive a substantial amount of the vote end up with very, very little representation in Parliament? If we look at Scotland, we know that there are Tories in Scotland. You know that there are a large number of Labour voters in Scotland, and yet there is only one seat represented from Scotland now that is not, that was not, because we've dissolved Parliament, of course. There's only one seat which isn't represented by the SNP. It doesn't make sense. So yes, of course we need a PR system. But if we do that, if we call for that, we have to recognise the other side of the coin, which is that you will have to enter into alliances with other parties to govern. So I think the two questions are very well put. The Greens would look to go into alliance with the Labour Party and the Lib Dems because we already do that on a local level. I have to admit that going into an alliance with the Conservatives would be a very, very different matter, and I do not think that that is currently on the cards.
Last but not least, Neil, to answer the questions.
Well, of course, I want the Conservatives to win a good majority because I think it's really important that we confront the issue of Brexit from a position of political strength. And I also think it's necessary for us to protect our economy and make sure the economic situation continues to improve as it has done during the last 7 years. And I would also be really worried if Jeremy Corbyn and Nicola Sturgeon were getting together to form a government of any description, because I think that would be absolute catastrophe for the Union of the United Kingdom and our economy as a whole, because as David has suggested, more tax, more tax, more tax. That's just not going to work on an economy like ours. So I want clarity, absolutely. But I do think the last coalition government that we had between ourselves and Liberal Democrats was a period of very good government. And I would welcome some sort of coalition if the arithmetic suggested that something like that could happen again. And I think that that is a wise position to have. As regards PR, it seems to me there's only one system in proportional representation that can actually work, and that's the one they have in Germany, which, funnily enough, we effectively, as occupying powers, thrust upon them. One of the supreme ironies is that so much that Germany has were our ideas, but they're not the things that we actually do ourselves. It is the additional member system where you still get the contact with constituencies, but you also have representation of what they call a Länder, which are sort of the regions of Germany. And I could see that working to some extent if we end up getting into further difficulties over devolution, because of course Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland might appreciate some sort of reflection on that idea. So I want to win because I think it's important.
Thank you very much, Neil.
But I would sanction a coalition.
We now move on to two questions on the same subject. I'll give the generic one first. With Donald Trump scrapping the commitment of the United States to the Paris Agreement, what, if anything, should the UK government do to signify its attitude to climate control? And then a question raised on the floor is, when will Her Majesty's government take the environment seriously and not as an afterthought, noting lack of detail in most party manifestos? And I know Neil has just sat down, but I'm going to surprise him and ask him to go first.
That's fine. I think President Trump has made a big mistake by withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. I think it's one of the great achievements of our time. I think President Obama was absolutely right to sign it on behalf of the United States, and I think that the French, in particular Laurent Fabius, the person who effectively engineered it, did a huge amount of good work. And I think that the US economy will find itself not in a best place in a very short period of time, not least because the European Union and China have already seized the opportunities. Because what you've got to remember is that dealing with climate change is also an opportunity for economic growth and innovation and technology, which will actually yield more employment still, but also better living conditions and a cleaner environment. So I think that that was a big mistake. Now, of course, the Conservative government has done a huge amount in the connection with renewable energy. The fact is that 98% of all solar panels have been installed since 2010. And we are able to say that a large amount of our electricity and energy providing is actually done through renewable energies. And I think that's a good thing. It does not, however, stop us needing to invest in nuclear power. That's what we're trying to do. At the moment, the balance between decommissioning and new build is not in favour of helping to solve that problem, but we must make it so by creating the right kind of investment opportunities for nuclear power to emerge.
10 seconds.
So I would say that in the future, we do need to work together across the globe to protect our environment, and at home, make sure that we lead by example.
Thank you very much. Sarah, would you like to go next, please?
I agree with Neil. We do need to lead by example. But what is needed is a pretty big example. What we need to do as a country, and hand in hand with Europe rather than the United States, is to actually construct a new Marshall Plan for energy. And it will require a fundamental realignment of our energy supply and of our economy. We have no other option. We need the global energy supply to be carbon neutral by 2050. That is approximately 33 years from now. It is almost inconceivable. We need a massive fundamental change. Trump has not helped us at all, but we can still take action. And the new government, which gets elected on June the 8th, we'll need to have in place by the start of the 2020s a plan which will start cutting carbon by 50% every decade and keep doing it. And if we're lucky, if we are lucky, we will develop large-scale carbon capture and storage. We don't have it yet. If we're lucky, we'll get it, and that will mean we probably may stay within the 2 degrees warming, but we cannot rely on that. We need large-scale mitigation, and we need to start now. But climate change is not the only issue we face. We also have to look at the mass extinction event that we were also living through. We are losing our biodiversity. We are losing our wildlife. And we need to look at the impact of our economy, of our resource extraction upon the habitat of those that we share the world with. The Green Party recognises we have to defend our natural world. We have to take action.
Thank you very much. David, would you like to go next, please?
Well, the first thing we should do is withdraw any invitation to Trump to this country. The idea this man is coming on a state visit is terribly unacceptable. And hope the Americans come to their senses and impeach him as soon as possible, then we get rid of him. The reality is what Trump has done has, in a sense, it's great sadness, because it's just consolidated in my mind the fact that China is now supposedly overtaking America by 2050 anyway. It's just brought that forward. China is now the world leader. No wonder it's talking to old Europe, because, of course, it can form a new power bloc. And the Chinese are desperately worried about climate change. I happened to go on a select committee visit about 10 years ago now, and they know we're 1.3 billion people. If the Yangtze starts to dry up, those people are not going to just be peaceful and not just going to carry on with their ordinary lives. So they are desperately worried about climate change. Yes, they're still putting up fossil fuel, coal-fired stations, and yes, they're trying to do what they can to raise the standard of living of their population. But they understand that cannot go on indefinitely, and they've got to get real about climate change, as indeed we have. Now, okay, we're doing very much better in terms of renewables. I was proud to be part of the legislative programme where we got the 2008 Climate Change Act in, which is still a pretty impressive document whereby we were leading the world. Sadly, we've gone backwards in some respects because we seem to be in America's pocket, but also we're not doing the things we could be doing with renewables. Neil goes on about increased solar, and that's great, but the wind that blows all the time, it is virtually impossible to get any more wind energy in terms of wind turbine sites up and running in England, because they will just block it in terms of planning, and that cannot be a good thing. So let's be real. We've got to get renewables much more in a prominent position, and let's deal with America as a friend and tell them they're wrong.
Next, we have Glenn.
President Trump was democratically elected by the people of the USA. He is doing what he has said he was going to do when he was on the election trail. UKIP as a party would repeal the 2008 Climate Change Act, and we would support a diverse energy market of based on coal, nuclear, shale gas, conventional gas. But saying that, we would also look at making sure that we could look into, let me finish, that we would look into technology such as carbon capture, which would then help.
It doesn't exist.
We need to make sure that any renewable energy sources and technologies are affordable and can be put in place quickly but at a good price. We think the current policy is a bit too short-sighted. We would want to bring down energy prices by cutting VAT and taking off the green levies, which make prices go higher, and we would save the average family about £170 a year. Now, election day is actually World Oceans Day, and there's so many plastic bottles and plastic that goes into the oceans, and one of our policies would be to look at doing a deposit system on plastic bottles to try and put that damage down. We would also look at creating small green spaces, and any new housing estates and industrial units that are built, we would make sure that any roads and tarmac that go into them and outside the houses would be made of more porous materials, which would then help with the flooding of...
Thank you very much. The next question is fairly simple.
I haven't had a go at that one yet.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
And I have some things to say.
I beg your pardon.
Thank you. Max Wilkinson, that's the name.
Thank you very much, Max. Yeah, absolutely.
I disagree with Glenn. That's the first point. Apart from on plastic bags, where he was on something. So the first thing, I think the first question was how should we react to Donald Trump pulling out the Paris climate change agreement? Well, of course, the first step would be the person who's in charge of the country to condemn him because it's wrong. Neil agrees. But none of his party does, because they want the strong and stable leadership that Theresa May is showing.
Absolutely.
And the bright Brexit. Under a smoggy sky, presumably, as well. So, condemn Trump, tell him he's wrong. There was a great liberal who commented on Trump pulling out the Paris Agreement. He's called Emmanuel Macron. And he said, Donald Trump wants to make America great again. Well, why don't the rest of us try to make our planet great again? Because there's only one, and we only get one shot at it. And that's the important thing that we need to bear in mind here. So, the second part of the question was, when will Her Majesty's government start to take climate change seriously? The answer is 2010 to 2015, when there was a Lib Dem energy secretary, when renewable energy generation trebled, when the government supported solar and wind energy and all kinds of other generations of energy. We looked into the tidal barrages in South Wales, which sadly the Tories then decided they weren't quite so keen on when we were no longer in government with them. Supporting them now, are we? Okay. Well, let's make sure it happens. And actually, now, around about, we generate sort of 25% of our energy from renewables. That's not enough. What the Lib Dems would do, we would go back in and we would reverse the cuts to support for renewable energy that the Tories have made since they came into government. We would then introduce a series of new green policies. So we would have a diesel scrappage scheme for cars, because under the Labour government, everyone was told to buy a diesel car because it was a very good thing to do. Sadly, that turned out not to be the case. So we would enable people to get rid of their old diesel and get a new, cleaner car. We'd pass a Zero Carbon Britain Act. So by 2040, we would have a carbon neutral economy, a couple of other things, green buildings, and then we would they would restore the zero carbon standard for all homes, and we'd tackle air pollution, which is killing 40,000 people a year. Yeah. And
I allowed you extra time by virtue of me getting it wrong again. So
thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to give you advance notice, you'll be number 2 on the next question. So. I put 2 together for this one, which is, do you support the hunting ban and or the badger cull? And I'm going to start this with David, if I may.
The second was the badger cull, yeah.
Yeah, do you support the hunting ban and or the badger cull?
Very easy, no and no. I mean, look, are we still a feudal country? I mean, we got rid of this blasted so-called... Yes, well, we are a feudal country, but don't go to Barclay. The reality is we have a clear-cut piece of legislation that was fought over for far too many hours. We wasted far too much time over it, but 80% of the population now support it. So that's not even think of revisiting it. Why, stupidly Theresa May spun that as a great election winning start to her campaign, well, it could only go downhill from there, couldn't it? I mean, more seriously on the badger cull, I've taken a very close interest. I mean, we won't go into the details, but this constituency, dare I say, has been at the centre of a lot of the investigation into bovine TB and the relationship between badgers and cattle. The fact is, there is no evidence that the cull is working. It's being done for purely reactive and, dare I say, almost a question of let's listen to what the farmers want us to do and let's just get on and do it, no matter how brutal and pointless it is. Let's just get back to good science. Good science tells us this is a dreadful disease. Anyone who knows farmers who suffer from it cannot feel anything other than sympathy. But you won't deal by it by trying to cull. The idea that you just keep widening the cull zones is just madness. I mean, the fact is that the one thing we know is those badgers who are diseased, will be the ones that will travel further and further and spread the disease. That's what the report, the Krebs report, demonstrated, followed by the work of the independent scientific group. It showed you will make the disease worse if you cull. So let's listen to them and let's get rid of it.
Thank you, David. Max.
Thank you. So, on the hunting ban, no, let's not start killing foxes again. It's sad. Foxes are nice animals, and really, let's look at why Theresa May announced that she was going to give a free vote on this, which I'm sure Nia is looking forward to. She announced that she was giving her party a free vote on this, or would if she was in government, because on that very same day there were some very bad economic statistics that were unveiled, which basically showed the economy was flatlining in the first quarter of the year. So, how does she distract the population from that? Well, Linton Crosby, her Australian election-winning genius, who may not be a genius this time next week, he said, and as he often does, let's just say something that's almost unthinkable to distract attention away from it. And on this occasion, it was, why don't we repeal the hunting ban? And it's very sad that that is the tone that we take in politics in this country, when we would rather think about things in such a cynical and horrible way, and to suggest that we should start killing and ripping apart little animals again, just to distract away from a fact which is inconvenient for the Conservative Party. As far as the badger cull goes, David rather stole everything I was going to say about that, including the Krebs report and all of those things. If there was a hint that the badger cull would actually help with the problem of bovine TB, then I think we would all sit down and consider it. But actually there is no suggestion at all that killing all these badgers, which actually are one of the most lovely animals that we have in this country and that are very precious to our countryside, we're killing them all basically for no reason. It's unacceptable, and it's just a Tory sop, just like fox hunting is. And I can confirm now, standing in front of you all, that there are no members of the local hunt delivering leaflets for me at this election.
Thank you, Sarah. Would you like to go next, please?
And there's none delivering leaflets for me either. So there's very little I can add. The Green Party is totally against the fox hunting ban being repealed. I wouldn't support it if I was the MP in Parliament. I have never supported the badger cull. There is no evidence base, as the other speakers have said, in favour of it. Yes, there is an issue with TB in our cows, and there is an issue of TB within our badger population. But culling the badgers will not solve the TB problem in our dairy herds. But there is something that might help our dairy farmers, and that is if the supermarkets buying their milk actually paid them a decent price for that product. And there used to be something called the Milk Marketing Board, which was brought into being especially to stop major buyers driving down the price of milk at the farm gate. And I think we could do worse than look at bringing that back again. And if farmers were paid better amounts of money for the milk that they produce, they could possibly look at introducing better biosecurity on their firms and taking other measures to actually look at improving the welfare of their animals and also protecting them in terms of TB. Thank you.
Next is Neil, please.
Well, not all members of the Hunt deliver leaflets for me, because some of them are members of the Labour Party, you might be interested to know.
Where?
Yes.
Where, Neil? Please, tell us. Kate Hoey.
Can we do that? Can we do that after the meeting?
The plan for a free vote. I actually think, a bit like grammar schools, it's a bit of a distraction from what's really important. But I do think that it's worth having a debate if that's what everybody wants to have. I am actually open-minded on this, and I will consult the constituency very widely if first of all I win, and secondly we do actually have a free vote, and I'm not sure we will, but we will see on that. On badgers, I'm afraid all the previous speakers are wrong about something really very fundamental. And it is this, that the real way to protect badgers is deal with TB. And that actually has an advantage too of tackling the problem in cattle. Because the fact is, scientists have proved there is a direct link between badgers effectively urinating on grass and cattle eating that grass. That's how it works, and it's something we've got to stop. Because cattle do not thrive at all with TB. It's a very unpleasant disease, and the same applies to badgers. And of course, there's a really big economic problem as well, which is farmers keep having to slaughter entire herds, get compensated and start again, and often find when they start again, the same problem occurs. So we have to stop this cycle. You must remember that the badger was protected back in the 1970s, not because actually they were under threat, but because there was badger baiting, which was a disgraceful activity. But what that's actually translated into is a population explosion of badgers. It's why the average weight of badgers is less than, is a kilo less than it used to be. And I just say this to you.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget the hedgehog. Because the hedgehog is being pushed out of
I think we have support for the hedgehog, so
basis.
Thank you very much.
And I think that needs to be pointed out.
Right. Thank you.
Yes or no? Do you support the hunt, Neil?
Who asked that?
From the front.
Yeah, I do support the hunt. I think it's a good activity. But what I don't necessarily
the question has been answered. The question has been answered. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Neil.
Was right.
The question's been answered. So, Glenn, to answer to the question on badgers and hunting.
Yes, I support the ban on hunting. I don't think this is I think this is a really cruel sport and outdated sport. I don't support the cull on the badgers. There must be more decent and humane ways of dealing with bovine TB. Let's support our farmers. I think this was another attempt by Theresa May to distract all of the electorate. And yes, I do agree with Sarah that we need to do something with the milk pricing and give the farmers back a fair deal on the milk that they're producing. We also need to get rid of all of the over-regulation that has gone into farming over the years from the EU and other sources. And all this over-regulation and too much paperwork for the farmers has taken over the changing of the seasons.
Thank you very much. As you might imagine, a lot of the questions at the back of the room today have been tabled relate to various comments which have come from the Conservative Party following the calling of the election. So I've tried very hard to put these together at this point. Clearly, as Neil is the Conservative candidate, I'm going to suggest that he goes second in a moment and that Max goes first. So give Neil a moment to just catch his breath, because there's going to be a plethora of questions. We'll try and do it in one go. And so we start off with a question which one or two people have asked me anyway today, which is, what does your leader mean exactly by enough is enough? I'll keep it to that one.
So which leader?
The current Prime Minister.
Oh, the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister, I beg your pardon, yes. It was the phrase that came out, I think, yesterday in London. So enough is enough. Another one coming in, which is, do you think that the Tories what do you think of the terrorists being sold arms to the Middle East, which are used to kill our citizens? This is something on the radio a bit at the moment. That's the similar question. Social media of late, a lot of Conservative posts have been untrue. I'll add the word "it is alleged." They are also funded by hedge funds in the United States, whose appreciation of truth is very dubious. And then the question here is, why should anyone trust Theresa May in security when she's made cuts to the police force? And just a catch-all here, which is, do you consider that the Conservatives' manifesto position on social care, sometimes called the dementia tax, is Theresa May's equivalent of Margaret Thatcher's debacle with the poll tax? So a number of questions. As I said, I'll let Max go first so that Neil has a moment to just gather his response. So I'll start off with Max.
I'm tempted just to tactically sit straight down again, because I'd like to hear Neil's responses immediately. But out of fairness, I will offer you my thoughts on these issues. I've been doing hustings most nights, so I don't know what Theresa meant by enough is enough, but I would hope it wasn't the kind of dog whistle politics that we've seen from too many politicians recently, which is basically hinting at the fact that there's a certain group in society who we don't like, and it's all their fault. I would hope that's not what it is, but based on fairly recent history in the Conservative Party, I'm not so sure. If I'm taking it out of context, then someone shout from the audience and tell me. What I do think is the issue around terrorism is that the last thing we need to be doing is stigmatising a certain group. But I do agree that enough is enough as far as terrorism goes. Sorry?
Thank you. Carry on, Max.
Thank you for your input. So, enough is enough when it comes to terrorism, indeed. What we need to do is fund frontline policing. We need to make sure that there are enough police back on the streets. We all know that police were cut significantly when Theresa May was Home Secretary, and when you talk to people who are police and security experts, one of the things they say is they've lost those key links with the community because there are no longer community policemen there.
Thank you.
Sorry, police officers. My gendered comment was obviously unacceptable. I apologise. Arms to the Middle East. We absolutely should not be selling arms to the Middle East. We shouldn't be selling arms to countries that might use them against us, obviously. And we shouldn't be selling arms to countries if there is a high chance that people in those countries may then use them in terrorist attacks on our streets. It seems entirely illogical. The Lib Dems actually want to introduce a register of UK arms dealers to make sure it's all above board and transparent so we know exactly what's going on. Social media Tory posts being lies. I can't believe that for a moment. They're always so trustworthy. And social care, is it Theresa May's version of the poll tax? Well, probably not, because Theresa May announced this in the middle of a general election campaign, which in some ways makes it even more of a massive misjudgment. There's no way you can justify introducing a policy that specifically will impact people who get dementia over other types of illness. It's unfair, and actually, when you look at the numbers and the policy, it just doesn't work either.
Thank you. Neil, would you like to go next, please?
Right, let's be clear about one thing. We are facing a really terrible threat, and that threat comes from a group of people who are determined to destroy our values, but it is not a threat from a religion or any discernible group like that. And we've got to get that across. We are fighting people who are bad, and they are out to destroy us, and we must actually deal with that in a ruthless way. The second point I would make is that we need to make sure that all of our services, and not just the police services, but it's actually the army, it's the intelligence system, work very carefully and well together so that we can actually gather the right kind of intelligence and then deal with that intelligence, use that intelligence in an effective way. And actually what happened at London Bridge demonstrates that our police service has been very responsive, actually, to the issue. But this is a real challenge. And the problem that we've got is you just don't know where they're going to strike unless you've actually done the kind of work and the research to find out more about their activities. And that's where things like social media come in. Because the real issue about social media is that's often the way they're used to communicate with each other. And we need to be able to find out more about those communications so that we can actually anticipate what's going to happen more readily and more easily. As for the issue about international aspects to this question, one of the things I think I've always emphasised in the past is we need good governance in the nation states that are around and about, and particularly those affected by these kind of individuals. And we need to work with nation states to help that good governance evolve. But what we also need to do is make sure that we have our allies and we have our relationships with the various countries so that we can actually work to destroy this threat with their help as well as our own efforts here at home. And finally, the prevent strategy is a really important one and does need to be noted.
Thank you very much. Glenn, would you like to go next, please?
Okay, Theresa May said today, enough is enough. Yes, enough is enough, but we're not funding our police, our armed services, or our border force, or our prisons with the right money, and we need to make a difference. Police funding, I've got a document here from the Home Office, and it's the police funding for the past 3 years. So from 2015-16 up to the present 2017-2018. I just want to ask Neil, why has police funding dropped by 306 million over those years, and what can we do to put the police funding back? Now, I recently went out on patrol with the police in Stonehouse, with the Stonehouse beat manager, and the thin blue line is so thin. At that time, there was only 5 police officers on duty, albeit it was a Sunday, but the police officer that I was with said if there was a major incident, all 5 of those officers within the Stroud area would have to deal with that issue, and then other police officers from other areas would have to come and fill in. So we need to fund the policing properly, put numbers back in. Since 2010, there was 171,600 police officers in the UK. Since then, it's dropped down to 151,000. These are all Home Office figures, by the way, which is a percentage of 11.7%. When is the government going to see that we need to protect the citizens in our country and fund the police properly? Social media, the companies who run these, they're big multinational companies, they need to do something different. And let the government know when hate is put on those sites, and that goes for every single type of hate, okay? It's not a problem with Muslims. I've got lots of friends who are Muslims, and they are really nice people. The problem we've got is with the extreme ideology of a number of people, and we need to stamp that out.
10 seconds.
With the dementia tax, we need to make sure that we give our old age pensioners dignity in their last few years of life. My wife works with people with dementia, and she says the funding isn't right. Like I talked about earlier on, we need to join the
Thank
NHS
you very
up
much.
and have one health system.
Thank you. David, would you like to go next, please?
Well, I hope when she said enough is enough that she was talking about police cuts, because sadly, for 6 years, plus when she became Prime Minister, she's been responsible for cutting the police service by 20,000 officers, plus, as Glenn quite rightly says, prisons and all the other public sector jobs related to it. And does anyone believe that's not had an impact in making our streets less safe? Not just in terms of terrorism, but in terms of ordinary crime. And I just think it's a tragedy that, having built a very effective police force, that she didn't listen to the Police Federation, who told her what was going on. It wasn't as though she wasn't warned. I link that to what I think is one of the tragic mistakes that we've made over the last 10 years, possibly 15 years, if you look at the antecedents, and that is we've got involved in Iraq, in Libya and Syria, all of which have had a huge impact in terms of radicalisation, because those conflicts haven't stayed in those countries, they've gone much further afield. And we've got to learn that we have to look much more carefully at what we do if we blunder into these foreign escapades. It's not about, there isn't a case for liberal intervention in extremis. But it is a case about thinking about what you're going to do when you're trying to extract yourself from those messes. And we have not done that, and it has led to total catastrophes in those countries, and it's led to repercussions on our streets here today. In terms of social media, I would just say something. I don't know enough about encryption, but we ought to have some accountability at the very least. But I do worry about the whole basis that the power of social media is anonymity. When I get very fed up, when I get trolled by people who I don't know, if you want to have a debate with someone, if you want to have an argument with someone, do it in person through using your own name. Don't actually try and hide behind some term that may sound very funny in the light of day, but actually is very hurtful when people are coming at you personally. Dementia tax, it is a poll tax.
Thank you, David.
Moment, and she will regret that. Never do policy evolution during a general election.
Thank you very much.
It doesn't work.
And Sarah.
David Cameron in 2015 commissioned a report into the funding of jihadist groups, and that report has remained unpublished. And the reason why that Home Office report has remained unpublished is believed to be because it is very, very critical of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the country that flogs women as witches, that beheads people as apostates, and, probably most importantly, also buys £3.5 billion worth of weapons that we manufacture. Now, enough is enough, and it's about time that Theresa May or whoever leads our government had some difficult and embarrassing questions with Saudi Arabia, because what we are seeing sweeping the globe, and it is not the Muslim religion, but it is based on an ideology based around the Muslim belief system, funded from Saudi Arabia, and that needs to stop. We need to cut the head off the very people who are funding the terrorism on our streets. Sorry.
Be careful there.
Apologies.
Just an expression.
I know.
Oh. I think that's the quote for the paper.
Yeah, I know. Please, no. So yes, enough is enough. And we also do need to look at funding our public services. I met with a police officer today who told me that between now and 2020, Gloucestershire Police Force is looking at losing £6.9 million on top of the cuts that it's already had to make. So how can we ask our police officers to respond in the way they are doing while they are still being subject to such a lack of resources? Enough is enough.
I'm very aware that we are running slightly late, but to try and get two more questions in, I'm going to do my little impersonation of Dimbleby. That the last one will be slightly humorous, or could be if they wish it to be humorous, but there's one more, and I'm going to limit it to 1 minute, the answer this time, so we can get two more, and then we will finish for the evening. So The next one is it's from the room. It's from Stephen Hancock. And the question is, where do the candidates stand on the issue of equal LGBT rights? And can they back this up with their, if they've been an MP, voting record, or indeed their background? So let's start this with David, if I may. And 1 minute.
Sorry, is this me? Right. I know there are some issues, and I've talked to people individually. I come from a Christian faith, I'm quite open about that, and my views have evolved. I believe entirely now that we must have an anti-discrimination approach to all aspects, not just of sexuality, but also in terms of race and gender and class. And to me, that was summed up by the Equalities Act of 2010, which I was proud to be part of. Now, some of the votes I had earlier, I had some misgivings about some of the ways in which Christians, I thought, could have been affected. But I think Christians have just got to accept, in all ways, in all walks of life, that now we've moved on. Our society is much more tolerant, is much more understanding, and people of all different sexual inclinations deserve to be treated the right way. I support gay marriage. I hope we one day will get it in church. Some of us are working that way, but it is hard graft on occasions. And of course, there are those who don't agree with it. But we have to try and win over the arguments. So yes, I have evolved my views, but I'm proud to say that I believe as a socialist in equality.
Glenn, next, please.
Yeah, I totally support LGBT rights. I've got lots of friends. Like I say, I grew up in London, which is a very, very diverse city. Lots of different cultures all mixing together. And yes, I've got lots of gay friends, and I think they're great, and they should be able to celebrate their... Okay? We live in a totally diverse world. Like David, I do support gay marriage, and I also, in my work, I said I work in retail. I actually studied, we had to do a course on the Equality and Diversity Act of 2010. So I am fully aware of that, and I support that in people's working lives as well. So everyone should be treated fairly and equally. So that's what I believe.
Thank you very much. Neil, would you like to go next, please? 1 minute.
To build a tolerant society, you've got to be fair. And I just think that everybody's rights are as important as my own rights or anybody else's rights. And I think it's absolutely essential that we understand that. So I was more than happy to vote to the gay marriage legislation that went through the Parliament of 2010 to 2015. I think that for a society to be fair and tolerant and also pluralist, which is a word I've emphasised before, you just simply have to understand that some people have different ways of living. You may not like them, but you should always tolerate them. And above all, you know what? It's essential to treat people with respect, because the only way you can do that is by letting them have that feel that they are as valuable as you think you are, and vice versa. So it is self-respect, and it is treating everybody else with respect. And I think that is a fundamental necessity in any society, and it is why I am so supportive of the liberal approach to people's lifestyles and enabling them to find their ways and explore their ways.
Thank you very much. And can we have Sarah next, please?
As a human being, I'm really happy to accept the Green Party policy and to promote it, that any right extended to any group should be extended to all of us. So yes to gay marriage, of course. How could anybody say no?
Max, next, please.
As a Liberal, I think one of the most important things that we can aim for is equality of treatment for everyone before the law. The state isn't always very good at treating people equally. Sometimes it treats people equally unfairly, of course. But one of the things I'm most proud of as a Lib Dem is that when we were in coalition with the Tories, we managed to convince them that equal marriage was the right thing to do. And an excellent Liberal called Lynn Featherstone managed to get it through Parliament. And then she wrote a book about it. It's called Happily Ever After. And I would urge you all to read it because it's really beautiful. So, and I'm pleased that David has been on a conversion and is now in favour of all of those rights for everyone too. And I would applaud his decision.
Thank you. The last question, as I said, it's not so much being humorous, but just a very interesting question. It's come from somebody tonight, which I think is Armoric Eater, and it is, could you honestly say what policies in your opponent's manifesto you like and would take on board? And let's... Max, would you like to go first?
Okay, so I'll take some of Sarah on the environment. I'll take some of Neil on civil liberties and Europe, in fact. I'll take some of what David says about the NHS and funding schools. And actually, Glenn has said some things that I've agreed with during these past 9 hustings too. So if you come to me afterwards, I'll tell you which ones I agreed with. I can't think of any off the top of my head now. But it does. but for a UKIP person, he does seem to be quite a good one.
It's working. They're actually doing this under a minute, so I think we're on the fast lane now. Sarah, would you like to go next, please?
From the Lib Dems, I'll take zero carbon energy by 2050. I'll take PR, and I'll also take their position on a referendum on Europe after the Article 50 negotiations. With David and the Labour Party, end austerity, absolutely, take that on board. With regards to UKIP, I think I'll go for the plastic bottle, the plastic bottle tax.
Yeah, that's what I meant to.
And with regards to the Conservative Party, actually, it's not the recent manifesto, but it is what they did previously in government, and that is the anti-slavery proposals, the anti-slavery legislation, which was actually brought in by Theresa May. I actually thought that was quite a good piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn, would you like to go next, please?
Okay, if I had to agree with Max on the Lib Dems and Sarah on the Greens, I would go for PR. We do need electoral reform. We need a new system. With David, I probably agree. I think we agree that we need to get the funding on police right and on our public services. On the Conservatives, I would just agree that we need to get a right deal for Europe and get the right deal for our country.
Neil, would you like to go next, please?
Well, this question reminds me of something really important, and that is actually there is really rather more that unites political parties than divides them from each other. You know, when we're in Parliament, a huge amount of legislation is actually uncontested, and quite right too, because we actually agree on things. And the answers we've already had demonstrate that. I am keen to make sure that we protect our environment. So there are elements of Sarah's manifesto, and I like her slogan, it's not just 5 years, it's 50 years, and I think that's right. Glenn, the plastic bottle thing's good because actually I've done a lot of work on the condition of the southern seas around Antarctica, and one of the things is actually what actually ends up there, and it's not good news, so we have to tackle that. Max, you know, I think you've sensed I'm a fairly liberal-minded kind of person, and I think that the Liberal Democrats have always demonstrated that. And David,
thank you very much. Thank you.
I think there are elements.
I think we've actually finished the minute.
There are elements of workers' rights which I think are good in Labour's approach.
Thank you very much. And David, to conclude.
All I would say, it's bad enough having to read your own manifesto, let alone having to read everyone else's manifesto. I mean, there is a lot of commonality. I mean, it's nice to know that the Tories have stolen a number of our policies, like the energy price fix. Please bring back Ed Miliband. You know, I mean, it's the way of the world that suddenly, some years later, somebody thinks, well, that wasn't such a bad idea after all, even though they panned it at the time. All I would say is electoral reform is important to me. So in terms of all three of the other side besides Neil. I mean, even in terms of Neil, I do think that even though we're very poles apart in terms of our politics in many respects, I respect him as a Democrat. I respect him. He's trying to fight within his party, as sometimes I've had to fight within the Labour Party, to try and get a different point of view. And I think that's what every politician should try and do. Even though we belong to a party, you have to fight your position and you have to actually stand on your principles. Because if you just get drawn along by what the manifesto says, then to me, that will result in you being on the slippery slope. You might become a minister, but you won't be a good member of Parliament.
Can I say thank you to all on the stage for the way they've answered the questions. I think they've done so in a way which has helped everybody in the room. And of the room, may I thank you all for coming. I think it's a fantastic and absolutely amazing attendance, and it shows to me yet again what a special place Stroud is. And I apologise to all the people that gave questions that haven't been tabled tonight. As I said, I counted up, in fact, I think we were between 80 and 90, so clearly impossible to satisfy everybody. And I apologise, a fairly difficult task to try and bring those together. I think it has been a constructive evening. We're now just a few days away from the election, and hopefully tonight has helped those present to make a decision as to where they're going to put the cross. So thank you very much all for coming, and please...
And can we thank our chair?